Today, Glitch Productions is one of the biggest names in independent animation. With hit series like Murder Drones and the amazing Digital Circus, the studio has built an audience of millions around the world. But none of that happened overnight. Long before Glitch existed, Kevin Lerdwichagul was just a teenager in Australia making Mario 64 videos for fun. What started as a simple hobby would eventually grow into one of the most influential independent animation studios on the internet. Kevin and Luke Lerdwichagul grew up in Australia in a family with Thai heritage, and their household ran a fruit and vegetable business that turned out to be more important to their creative career than it might seem at first glance. Kevin was the one with the storytelling instincts, drawn toward writing and direction, while Luke leaned into editing, humor, and production. And that division of roles is something you can still see in how Glitch operates to this day. Around 2009, Kevin got interested in machinima, which is the practice of using video game engines to create animated content, and he noticed that almost nobody was doing it with Super Mario 64. He started experimenting with emulators, ROM modifications, camera plugins, and video editing software, producing short animated sketches using a Nintendo 64 game as his studio, and doing almost all of it by himself. On May 7th, 2011, the first video appeared on the SMG4 channel called The Cake is a Lie, and that was where everything started. For a long time, the channel did not generate enough income to sustain itself, and Kevin acknowledged in interviews that the family fruit business essentially kept the project alive financially during those early years. There were no investors, no funding, and no guarantee that any of it would go anywhere. Just two brothers working on something they believed in, while a small family business paid the bills. The early SMG4 content was built entirely around the absurd internet humor of the early 2010s. Random comedy, MLG edits, YouTube poops, rage comics, Nyan Cat, and basically every meme that defined that era. It was deliberately chaotic, and the point was to keep publishing and keep learning. Luke became increasingly involved in editing, ideas, comedy, and production management, and over time, both brothers were working on it full time. What was happening underneath all the chaos was that Kevin was absorbing every part of what it meant to run a creative operation on the internet. How to write, direct, edit, manage an upload schedule, understand audience retention, and produce something that kept people watching. By 2014 and 2015, the channel was pulling millions of views, and Kevin had started connecting individual videos into longer story arcs, building what fans called SMG4 lore. He was learning how to tell stories across multiple episodes, which would turn out to be exactly the skill he needed for what came next. SMG4 was not just a YouTube channel. It was years of free training in every discipline a studio needs, paid for by meme videos about Mario falling off things. And that foundation is probably the most important reason Glitch became what it did. By 2016, the content was becoming more cinematic, with longer videos, better production, and more elaborate storytelling. Kevin was also becoming clearer about what he actually wanted to build, which was not just a popular channel, but a real animation studio with properties the studio actually owned. And that was where the first serious problem appeared. Almost every character on SMG4 belonged to Nintendo, and that made it essentially impossible to build a business around them. You cannot develop merchandise at scale, you cannot bring creative work to partners or distributors, and you cannot market yourself as a professional studio when the intellectual property at the center of your content belongs to someone else. Kevin understood that if Glitch was going to become what he wanted it to be, the studio needed to create things it could fully own. Over the following years, several characters went through complete redesigns that moved them away from their Nintendo origins entirely. If they wanted to build the dream, they had to start from scratch. On September 5th, 2018, Kevin and Luke published a video announcing that the brand name Glitchy Boy, which Luke had first mentioned in May 2017, was officially becoming Glitch Productions. The announcement was paired with the first reveal of MetaRunner, the project that would prove whether any of this was actually possible. From the very beginning, Glitch was built around three clear ideas: produce original animation, stay independent from large studios, and retain full creative control of everything the studio made. The decision to distribute directly through YouTube rather than through traditional broadcasting was deliberate because it meant no intermediary had the power to change what the studio made or how it reached its audience. The company that had been kept alive by a fruit business was now making its first real move. MetaRunner was the moment Glitch had to prove that everything they had learned from years of YouTube production could be applied to something that operated more like a real television series than a channel upload. Where SMG4 ran on speed and improvisation, MetaRunner required months of development, concept, character design, world building, storyboards, professional voice acting, original music, cinematic 3D animation, and a coordinated production pipeline that the studio had never operated before. The project received support from Screen Australia, a government arts funding agency, alongside collaborations with AMD, Epic Games, and Crunchyroll, which made the scale of production possible. Crucially, the team working on MetaRunner had to figure out how to do all of it while still publishing SMG4 content, managing a growing team for the first time, and staying financially stable. It was a production that demanded the studio become something it had not yet fully been. When the first season launched on July 25th, 2019, it answered the core question. Yes, a studio that started on YouTube could produce animation of a quality that attracted and retained an audience expecting something closer to professional TV. What happened across 2 seasons of production? As lighting improved, character animations became more natural, cinematography grew more sophisticated, and action sequences became more complex, became the technical foundation for every major Glitch production that followed. MetaRunner was not just the studio's first original series, it was where Glitch learned how to be a studio. After MetaRunner demonstrated the model work, Kevin and Luke reached a conclusion that would become one of the most consequential decisions in the studio's history. Glitch could not depend only on its own ideas. 2 people, no matter how capable, have limits to how many original concepts they can develop simultaneously, while also running a growing company with real employees and real productions in progress. This shift produced several things at once. A separate Glitch channel was created in early 2020, specifically for original productions, separating the studio's serious animation work from the comedy output of SMG4 and establishing a clearer brand identity for the studio itself. Sunset Paradise, a new series starring a redesigned original version of Meggie set in a coastal city inspired by Australia, was developed and released in 2021. And while that was in production, Kevin and Luke were watching the independent animation landscape on YouTube with a specific question: who out there was making something different enough to be worth building around? The creator they found was Liam Vickers, who had been publishing animated shorts on his personal channel with a creative voice that was immediately unlike anything Glitch had produced. His work leaned into dark science fiction, black humor, fast dialogue, and morally complicated characters, and in 2018, he had published the pilot of Cliffside, a series set in a supernatural Wild West that showed real storytelling ability without having the production infrastructure to grow it into something larger. Kevin and Luke approached Vickers with a proposal to develop an entirely new series under Glitch, and the result was Murder Drones. The key detail here is that the series did not exist before that collaboration. Liam developed the concept specifically alongside Glitch while maintaining full creative control over what it was and how it felt. The studio provided the infrastructure, Liam provided the vision. That arrangement was a deliberate philosophical step. Glitch was no longer just the studio that Kevin and Luke built from their own ideas. It was becoming a platform for independent creators who had something to say and needed the resources to say it properly. And that change in how the studio thought about itself would define everything that came after. The Murder Drones pilot, published on October 29, 2021, was built using Unreal Engine in a way Glitch had not done before, and the visual result was immediately apparent. Dynamic lighting, cinematic camera work, and an aesthetic that felt closer to a big-budget animated film than a YouTube production gave the series a visual identity that stopped people mid-scroll. The studio had found a technological approach that matched the ambition of the story Liam was telling. The response to the pilot went beyond what the studio had expected. Large numbers of viewers discovered Glitch for the first time through Murder Drones, with no prior connection to SMG4 or MetaRunner at all. People began talking about the animation quality in comparisons to traditional studio productions. The community that formed around the series generated its own ecosystem of theories, fan art, and analysis that fed back into the broader interest in the show. The most important thing Murder Drones did was change how people understood what Glitch was. The studio went from being seen as the team behind SMG4, a YouTube comedy channel with a loyal but specific audience, to being recognized as an independent animation studio capable of producing work that could stand on its own in any conversation about animated series. That change in perception opened doors that had not previously been open, and it gave the studio a new level of confidence about the kind of projects it should pursue next. After Murder Drones, Kevin and Luke were already looking for the next major project, and the approach was the same as it had been with Liam Vickers. Find a creator with a distinctive personal voice and a concept that was genuinely different from anything Glitch had made before. The creator they settled on was Gooseworks, who had spent years producing experimental animated shorts, original music, and surrealist projects within the independent animation community, mixing bright aesthetics with genuinely unsettling psychological content in a way that was immediately recognizable. Kevin later explained that Glitch was actively trying to avoid repeating the formula of Murder Drones. Each series in the studio's catalog needed to have its own identity, because a studio where every show feels like a variation on the same thing eventually stops being interesting to audiences and to creators. Gooseworks brought an idea about humans trapped inside a digital world run by an AI, drawing on influences from 90s computer graphics and psychological horror, and the studio decided to build it. The announcement came on January 27, 2023, and the project was called The Amazing Digital Circus. The pilot published on October 13, 2023, and what happened in the hours that followed was unlike anything Glitch had experienced before. Before the first day was over, fan art had started appearing. Before the first week was done, theory videos were being published in multiple languages. Within days, the characters were in memes, reaction content, voiceovers, short animations, and TikToks from accounts that had never engaged with independent animation before. People who had no idea what Glitch was, who had never watched SMG4 or Murder Drones, who had not been following independent animation at all, were suddenly talking about Pomni and Jax and Kane as if they had always known them. The internet moved fast, but this moved faster than almost anything it had seen from an animation series. Then, the numbers started reflecting what the feeling already knew. 20 million views in the first week, 73 million in 2 weeks, 100 million in under 4 weeks, and growth that did not slow down after that. When the series arrived on Netflix in October 2024, it entered the global top 5 of most watched shows in its opening week. The theatrical release of the last act in June 2026 broke Fathom Entertainment's opening record with a global weekend of $36.6 million across more than 2,000 cinemas. Before the first theater screening, the series had passed 1 billion total views on YouTube. For Glitch, the scale of what the amazing Digital Circus became was genuinely new territory. It was not the same kind of success as Murder Drones, where a passionate community grew steadily around a niche product. This was a cultural moment that extended far beyond the independent animation world and placed Glitch in conversations about animation broadly, alongside studios with decades of history and resources that dwarfed anything the Lerdwichagul brothers had ever worked with. The Glitch that exists in 2026 is genuinely unrecognizable compared to what it was in 2018. The studio now maintains multiple productions simultaneously, something that was logistically impossible for most of its first decade. The catalog includes Metarunner, Sunset Paradise, Murder Drones, The Amazing Digital Circus, The Gaslight District, and Knights of Guinevere, each representing a different creative collaboration and a different chapter in the studio's evolution. Kevin and Luke have moved into executive and strategic roles, with each series operating under its own creative team. Glitch X, the studio's annual online event, has expanded to platform independent creators from outside Glitch as well, reinforcing the idea that the studio sees its role as strengthening the independent animation ecosystem rather than just promoting its own output. What has not changed is the core philosophy. Glitch still builds around creators with strong individual voices. It still publishes its main content for free on YouTube. It still prioritizes finishing stories with intention over extending them commercially, as it demonstrated when Murder Drones concluded, rather than continuing indefinitely. And it still operates without being absorbed into or controlled by a larger media company, which was the original point when Kevin decided that depending on Nintendo characters was a ceiling he needed to break through. So here's the answer to the question from the beginning of this video. Glitch never tried to compete with Disney or Pixar on those companies' own terms. Instead, the studio built something that larger companies could not have built: a direct relationship with an audience, a financial model rooted in community rather than corporate licensing, and a creative output that comes from giving individual creators the infrastructure to realize their own visions rather than fitting them into a predetermined house style. What started with a teenager making Mario 64 videos while a family fruit business paid the bills turned into a studio with 1 billion YouTube views, theatrical releases across thousands of cinemas, and multiple original franchises followed by millions of people worldwide. The reason the Glitch story matters beyond the specific shows it has produced is that it demonstrated something the industry needed to see proven, that the internet is not just a distribution channel for content made by traditional studios. It is where entirely new kinds of studios can grow from nothing into something that changes what everyone else thinks is possible. Which chapter of the Glitch story surprised you the most? And which of their upcoming projects are you most curious about? Drop it in the comments. See you in the next one.